Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention. The captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please stow your carry-on luggage underneath the seat in front of you or in the overhead bin.
Aviation has been around for the last century, but not like this. The aviation industry has provided many turning points in American and world history. Before we had airplanes, we had something called an airship. A zeppelin or dirigible is like a modern-day blimp. They are a great way of travel, especially between cities in Germany. The military also enjoyed using these lighter-than-air machines because they were quiet, they towered overhead, and they were great for spying and dropping bombs. Unfortunately, the life of Zeppelins ended in 1937 after the Hindenburg accident. This catastrophe showed people that a big balloon full of hydrogen was probably not the best way of travel, because you're practically flying in a bomb. In 1903, two young men from Ohio were interested in flight, so they pursued their dreams by trying to build an airplane. These entrepreneurs were named Orville and Wilbur Wright. After many failures in their design, they finally came up with a flying airplane, and became the first people to fly in a heavier-than-air machine. A few years later, in 1914, an American named Tony Janus flew the first commercial flight with a single passenger from St. Petersburg to Tampa, Florida in a Benos flying boat. In 1913, a trip between these two cities sitting on opposite sides of the Tampa Bay took 2 hours by steamship or 4 to 12 hours by rail. Traveling the journey by automobile all the way around the bay would take about 20 hours. A flight would take just 20 minutes. The plane, however, was merely a boat with wings. Unfortunately, they had to land the plane in the Tampa Bay to fix a malfunctioning propeller. Good thing it was a boat. Even though the result of this first attempt for a commercial airline was disappointing, it was a pivotal moment in history. In the coming years, investors, commerce, the public, and eventually the world would realize the impact that this significant event would have. By 1917, the U.S. government felt enough progress had been made in the development of aircraft to warrant something totally new, the transport of mail by air. That year, Congress appropriated $100,000 for an experimental air mail service to be conducted jointly by the Army and the Post Office between Washington and New York, with an intermediate stop in Philadelphia. The first flight left Belmont Park, Long Island, bound for Philadelphia on May 14, 1918, and the next day continued to Washington, where it was to meet President Woodrow Wilson. With a large number of war surplus aircraft at hand, the Post Office set its sights on a far more ambitious goal: transcontinental airmail services. It opened the first flight segment between Chicago and Cleveland on May 15th, 1919, and completed the route on September 8, 1920, when it reached the most difficult part of the route, the Rocky Mountains. Airplanes still could not fly at night when the service first began, so the mail was handed off to a train service at the end of each day. Nonetheless, by using airplanes, the post office was able to shave off 22 hours from the original coast-to-coast mail service. Air travel when it was dark was a challenge for pilots, explained by Mr. John Mosley, a retired military and commercial pilot.
In the beginning, air travel, you fly any place you want, do anything you want to do, and then, but you had to prepare, you tended to get lost. So when they started to fly the mail, the CAA put up a series of lights, and if you were going from New York to Cleveland, or Cleveland to Chicago, and they had a different code on them. All right, and as you go from one light to another, which are about 40 miles apart. I can't remember how, but they're and close enough together that when you left one, you could see the next one. I guess about 35, 40 miles.
If an airline did not have an airmail contract, its chances of survival were slim. Similar progresses were being made in other countries such as England, France, Germany, and Australia. KLM was a Dutch airline that started on May 17, 1920, but gained a high reputation in 1921. Qantas is an Australian airline that started a service on November 2, 1922, from Queensland to the Northern Territories for passengers and mail to get to those destinations faster. In 1928, 82 different smaller companies merged to form American Airways. The company formed before World War II in 1929, but E.O. Cord changed the name in 1934 to American Airlines. During the 1930s and 40s, developers worked on creating aircraft that could fly further and faster. The twin-engine plane was highly successful, and we still use newer versions of them today, along with planes that have 4 or even 6 engines. The next major development in commercial air travel arrived in 1952 with the jet engine. With a more powerful and efficient engine, the jetliner could fly further and faster, carrying as many as 400 passengers, while providing a much smoother, quieter, and comfortable ride. Planes could now fly at speeds of 300 miles per hour. Then, in 1969, one passenger plane reached supersonic. Concorde was airborne. Concorde was a joint venture between England and French governments. It could fly at twice the speed of sound at an altitude of up to 60,000 feet and entered into service on January 21, 1976. Concorde was withdrawn from service in October 2003 after 27 years due to rising fuel and maintenance costs as well as aircraft age. The first non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1919 by British aviators Alcock and Brown took almost 16 hours. Concorde made the journey from London to New York in less than 3. It wasn't just airplanes that were developing. The technology used to help fly them was also making giant leaps forward. Communication and navigation systems also started to advance. Planes went from following guiding beacons to using radar, and in the late 1960s to early 1970s, automated computer navigational systems and radios. Mr. Arthur J. Harriman, a retired World War II veteran and commercial airline pilot, shares his experience.
To fly, if you're just talking about, manipulated controls and manually getting the thing off the ground and back on again, it hasn't changed a bit. It's still the same thing. Still the same controls and the same relation to power and speed and so forth. But as the aircraft itself gets more complicated, well, now you're getting more into computer science, and of course, you have to monitor these systems to know if things are going right. But actually, the actual flying of the airplane is being taken over by computers.
Now we use satellite and global positioning systems and have planes that can fly completely by computer. When commercial planes were first built, they could only seat a few people, between 20 and 40. But now, the newest plane, the Airbus A380, can carry over 800 passengers. It can fly at a speed of 640 miles per hour at an altitude of 43,000 feet. The wingspan of the A380 is 80 meters, twice the length of the Wright brothers' first flight. The busiest international airport in the world is London Heathrow in England, handling 69.4 million international travelers a year and 86 airlines from all over the world. In 2011, over 800 million passengers traveled by air on nearly 10 million flights from the 17,636 active airlines that exist today. For centuries, man has had the urge to fly, and for the last 100 years this urge has become a reality, and for some, the reality has become a necessity. Planes carry people, mail, cargo, and much more. A flight from London, England to Sydney, Australia first took 30 days. It now takes just 23 hours. The world has gone from being flat and traveled by boats to flying through the air around the globe we call home in less than 43 hours. This just goes to show, the sky is the limit. Or is it?